The first light of morning arrived quietly over the American countryside. Long before towns grew busy and long before roads filled with travelers, the land rested beneath a pale sky. A thin layer of mist floated above fields and meadows. Dew clung to blades of grass. The air felt cool and clean, carrying the faint smell of damp earth and wood smoke that had drifted from chimneys during the night. In a small wooden house near the edge of a settlement, a woman slowly opened her eyes. The room was still dark enough that the corners remained hidden in shadow. The fire in the hearth had nearly gone out. Only a few glowing embers remained beneath a blanket of gray ash. Their soft red light flickered gently, creating small movements of color on the rough wooden walls. For a moment, she remained still. The house was quiet. The day had not yet fully begun. Nearby, children slept beneath handmade blankets. Their breathing was slow and peaceful. Outside, the world seemed to be waiting for the sun. This quiet moment was often the calmest part of the entire day. Early American women rarely lived lives of leisure. Their days were filled with work from sunrise until long after darkness returned. Yet many of them knew these gentle moments before dawn. In those few peaceful minutes, before chores and responsibilities arrived, there was only silence and the promise of another ordinary day. Slowly, she sat up. The wooden floor felt cool beneath her feet. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and moved carefully across the room. Every movement had become familiar through years of repetition. She did not need bright light to find her way. Her hands knew where everything belonged. The hearth was the heart of the home. Without it, cooking became difficult. Warmth disappeared during cold weather. Water could not easily be heated. Much of daily life depended upon maintaining a steady fire. She knelt beside the ashes and searched for hidden embers. Sometimes enough heat remained from the previous evening. Sometimes a new fire had to be built from the beginning. Both tasks required patience. Soon, small pieces of dry wood were placed carefully above the glowing coals. A faint crackling sound followed. Tiny flames appeared. At first they seemed fragile and uncertain. Then they grew stronger. Orange light slowly filled the room. Shadows moved across the walls like quiet visitors. The house began to wake. Outside, the sky changed from black to deep blue. Birds started their morning songs. One voice joined another. Then another. Before long, the trees seemed filled with music. The woman placed a kettle near the fire. Water would soon be needed. Every day required water. It was used for cooking, cleaning, washing, and countless other tasks. Today, as on most days, more water would have to be brought from a nearby source. Perhaps there was a well. Perhaps a stream. Perhaps a spring hidden beneath trees. Wherever it came from, obtaining water demanded effort. There were no faucets to turn. Every bucket carried into the home represented time and labor. The first rays of sunlight reached the windows. Golden light touched the rough wooden table. It illuminated shelves lined with simple dishes and tools. Nothing inside the home was extravagant. Most families owned only what they truly needed. A sturdy table. A few chairs. Cooking pots. Blankets. Tools. Every object served a purpose. Many items had been made by hand. Some had taken weeks to complete. Others had been carefully repaired again and again rather than replaced. In such homes, usefulness often mattered more than beauty. Yet beauty still existed. It appeared in small things. The careful stitching on a quilt. The smooth handle of a wooden spoon. The pattern woven into a basket. The way morning sunlight entered through a window and rested upon a floor worn smooth by many footsteps. As the fire strengthened, the woman began preparing breakfast. Simple meals were common. Cornmeal might be cooked into porridge. Bread baked earlier in the week might be served. Sometimes there were eggs. Sometimes milk. Sometimes preserved fruits from the previous season. The meal depended upon the family's circumstances and the resources available. Nothing was wasted. Food represented many hours of labor. Planting, harvesting, grinding grain, gathering ingredients, preparing meals. Every bite carried the effort of many hands. Outside, the settlement slowly came to life. Smoke rose from chimneys. Doors opened. People stepped into the cool morning air. Farmers began their work. Animals stirred within barns and pens. Across the landscape, countless women were beginning days much like this one. Some lived in small frontier cabins surrounded by wilderness. Some lived in growing villages. Some lived on farms that stretched across rolling fields. Others lived in coastal towns where ships arrived from distant places. Though their lives differed in many ways, certain rhythms connected them. The day began early. Work filled the hours. Family remained at the center of daily life. And through every season, women carried responsibilities that helped entire households survive. The sun climbed higher. Children began to wake. The quiet stillness of dawn slowly faded. Voices filled the house. Footsteps crossed the floor. Breakfast was served. Another day had begun. For early American women, the morning hours often passed quickly. There were beds to straighten, dishes to wash, clothing to mend, water to carry, meals to prepare, gardens to tend, animals to feed. The list seemed endless. Yet much of this work was performed without hurry. The pace of life followed nature. People moved according to daylight, weather, and seasons. There was little reason to rush. The sun would cross the sky at its own speed. The crops would grow according to their own schedule. Rain would arrive when it wished. Winter would come when the year turned toward cold. Life unfolded gradually. And so did the work. On this particular morning, the woman stepped outside carrying a wooden bucket. The air felt fresh against her face. Above her, the sky had become bright blue. A few white clouds drifted slowly overhead. The world seemed calm. Nearby fields shimmered beneath morning sunlight. Birds moved among trees. Insects hummed softly. Somewhere in the distance, a cow called out. She followed a familiar path toward the well. The ground beneath her feet was uneven but well known. She had walked this route hundreds of times. Perhaps thousands. The journey required little thought. Instead, her mind wandered through the tasks waiting for her throughout the day. There would be laundry. Perhaps bread baking. Perhaps gardening. Perhaps sewing. Each season brought different responsibilities. Spring demanded planting. Summer required constant attention to crops and food preservation. Autumn brought harvest work. Winter created its own challenges of warmth, repair, and preparation. No season was truly idle. Every part of the year carried its own rhythm. At the well, she lowered the bucket. The rope moved steadily through her hands. A splash echoed from below. Then came the slow effort of lifting the heavy load back toward the surface. Water sparkled in the sunlight. Tiny droplets fell back into the darkness beneath. The bucket felt heavy. Yet the task was familiar. so familiar that it had become almost invisible. Many of the most important duties in early American life were like that. They happened every day. They demanded effort. Yet they often passed without special notice because they were simply part of living. The woman turned toward home. The bucket swayed gently with each step. Morning continued to unfold around her. The day was still young. Much remained to be done. And beyond the fields, beyond the forests, beyond the rivers and distant hills, countless other women were beginning their own quiet mornings, each one contributing in small and steady ways to the growing story of early America. The sun continued its slow climb into the sky. And the day moved forward. By the time the sun rose above the treetops, the morning had settled into its steady rhythm. The household was fully awake now. Children moved about the small home. Simple conversations drifted through the rooms. The fire crackled gently inside the hearth, spreading warmth and light. Outside, the farmyard carried its own collection of sounds. Chickens scratched the earth. A dog wandered through patches of sunlight. Somewhere nearby, the steady chewing of livestock could be heard from a barn. For many early American women, the morning hours were among the busiest of the day. Breakfast had been prepared and served, but the work was only beginning. The table needed clearing. Dishes needed washing. Food had to be stored carefully. Nothing could be left carelessly exposed. Every resource mattered. Every loaf of bread, every preserved vegetable, every handful of grain represented valuable labor. The woman carried dishes to a basin. Water that had been gathered earlier was used carefully. Even washing required thought. A spilled bucket meant more walking, more lifting, more time. Modern conveniences were unknown. Every task depended upon human effort. Yet because everyone lived this way, these responsibilities felt natural rather than unusual. As she worked, sunlight entered through the windows. The beams of light revealed tiny particles floating quietly through the air. Dust drifted slowly above the floor. The room glowed with soft golden colors. Outside, the day promised fair weather. Blue skies stretched across the horizon. Gentle breezes moved through fields of grass. Such mornings were welcome. Rain could make many tasks difficult. Storms could delay important work. Good weather often felt like a gift. Soon, attention turned toward clothing. In early America, garments were precious possessions. People did not own large collections of clothing. A few dresses, aprons, shawls, and work garments often served a woman for many years. Fabric itself required considerable effort to produce. Every tear mattered. Every loose thread deserved attention. The woman sat near a window where sunlight helped illuminate her work. A basket of sewing rested beside her chair. Needles, thread, small pieces of fabric saved from older garments. Nothing useful was discarded. She carefully examined a worn sleeve. A small tear had appeared near the cuff. Patiently, she began to mend it. The movement of the needle became almost rhythmic. In, out, in, out. The task required concentration but also offered moments of quiet reflection. Many women spent countless hours sewing. They repaired clothing, made blankets, created curtains, constructed garments for growing children, prepared linens for the home. The skill was essential. A household depended upon it. Outside, the sounds of daily life continued. A wagon rolled along a distant road. Birds sang from nearby trees. Wind moved through leaves with a soft rustling sound. The settlement remained peaceful. Life was not easy, but there was often a sense of order in these ordinary routines. The seasons guided activities. The weather influenced decisions. Nature remained close at hand. Unlike the crowded cities that would emerge in later generations, many early American communities existed in direct relationship with the surrounding land. A woman could often look out her window and see fields, forests, rivers, or open sky. The natural world was never far away. As the morning advanced, another important task awaited. Laundry. For modern people, washing clothes may seem simple. For early American women, it was often one of the most demanding household chores. The process could consume much of an entire day. Clothing was gathered carefully. Buckets were filled. Water was heated. Soap, often made at home, was prepared. The woman carried supplies outdoors. The sun had risen higher now, warming the air. A wooden wash tub stood ready. Nearby, fresh water reflected bright patches of sunlight. One by one, garments were washed, scrubbed, rinsed, lifted, wrung out. The work required strength. Wet fabric became surprisingly heavy. Hands remained submerged in water for long periods. Backs grew tired. Arms ached. Yet the task continued. Clean clothing mattered. Families took pride in maintaining what they owned. Even simple garments could appear neat and respectable when cared for properly. As she worked, the woman occasionally paused to look across the landscape. The view changed with every season. In spring, new green growth appeared almost daily. Summer covered fields in rich colors. Autumn transformed forests into shades of gold and crimson. Winter brought silence and snow. Each season altered daily life. Each season carried its own beauty. Today, however, belonged to a gentle season. The air remained pleasant. Sunlight shimmered across nearby grass. Clouds drifted slowly overhead. The hours passed quietly. After washing, clothing was hung to dry. Lines stretched between posts or trees. Fabric fluttered softly in the breeze. Shirts, aprons, dresses, small garments belonging to children. Together they formed a simple display of daily life. A record of the household itself. By midday, the sun stood high above the land. Shadows shortened. The air grew warmer. Work paused briefly for a meal. Lunch was often simple. Bread, cheese, milk, perhaps leftover stew, perhaps vegetables from the garden. Meals focused on nourishment rather than variety. Food needed to sustain people through long hours of labor. The woman sat for a few moments beneath the shade of a tree. Such moments of rest were valuable. Not because they were rare, but because they provided balance. The body required pauses. The mind welcomed stillness. Nearby, insects hummed softly. Leaves stirred overhead. The world seemed content to move at its own unhurried pace. During these quiet moments, thoughts often drifted toward family. Children growing older. Relatives living elsewhere. Neighbors who might visit soon. The future remained uncertain, as it always does, yet daily responsibilities kept life grounded in the present. There was comfort in routine. Comfort in familiar tasks. Comfort in knowing what needed to be done each day. Across early America, countless women shared similar experiences. Though their circumstances varied greatly, many lived lives centered upon family, home, and community. Their work rarely appeared in official records. Histories often focused on leaders, soldiers, and famous events. Yet ordinary women shaped daily life in powerful ways. Their labor sustained households. Their skills preserved resources. Their efforts helped communities survive and grow. Much of this work happened quietly. Without ceremony. Without recognition. Like the steady turning of seasons. Like rivers flowing toward distant oceans. Like sunlight moving slowly across a floor. After the meal, work resumed once more. The afternoon stretched ahead. Gardens required attention. Food preparation awaited. Perhaps there would be sewing. Perhaps candle making. Perhaps preserving food for future months. The day still held many hours. The woman stood and brushed dust from her apron. The breeze carried the scent of earth and growing plants. Children laughed somewhere nearby. The sky remained bright and clear. Another ordinary afternoon was beginning. And in the simple rhythm of daily life, history continued to unfold one quiet moment at a time. The afternoon sunlight spread gently across the countryside. The brightest hours of the day had arrived. Fields shimmered beneath the warm sky. Tall grass swayed in slow waves whenever the breeze passed through. The leaves of trees flashed silver and green as they turned in the sunlight. Birds rested in shaded branches, singing only now and then. The woman stepped toward the garden. For many early American families, the garden was one of the most important parts of the household. It provided food throughout much of the year and helped families remain independent. Every row of vegetables represented security. Every healthy plant promised future meals. The garden was not large, but it was carefully maintained. Rows of beans stretched across one section. Cabbages grew nearby. Squash vines spread slowly across the ground. Herbs filled smaller corners where sunlight reached between larger plants. Each crop required attention. Weeds had to be removed. Soil needed care. Young plants required protection from animals and harsh weather. The woman moved slowly along the rows, examining each plant. She noticed leaves damaged by insects. She pulled weeds from the soil. She adjusted small supports that helped climbing plants grow upright. The work was quiet. Only the sounds of nature accompanied her. The distant call of a bird. The hum of insects. The rustling of leaves. These sounds formed the background music of daily life. Hours could pass beneath such gentle noises. As she worked, the smell of warm earth rose into the air. It was a rich scent. Clean and familiar. A scent connected to growth, harvests, and changing seasons. Many early American women spent countless hours working close to the soil. They understood weather patterns. They noticed subtle changes in plants. They learned which crops thrived and which struggled. Their knowledge often came not from books but from experience passed between generations. Mothers taught daughters. Grandmothers shared lessons learned through many years. Knowledge traveled through conversations, observation, and practice. One season led into another. One year followed the next. The lessons remained. Nearby, a few chickens wandered through the yard. They pecked at the ground in search of insects and seeds. Occasionally they clucked softly to one another. Their movements seemed almost peaceful beneath the afternoon sun. Animals played an important role in many households. Chickens provided eggs. Cows supplied milk. Sheep offered wool. Each animal required care. Water needed carrying. Feed needed gathering. Shelters required maintenance. The responsibilities never completely ended. Yet these daily tasks became part of life's natural rhythm. The woman finished her work in the garden and walked toward a small storage building. Inside, Shelves held jars, baskets, and supplies. Some contained dried herbs. Others held grains or preserved foods. The room smelled faintly of wood, vegetables, and the harvests of previous seasons. Food preservation was one of the most important skills a woman could possess. The growing season eventually ended. Winter always arrived. Families needed supplies that would last through cold months when fresh crops became scarce. Throughout the year, women worked steadily to prepare for the future. Vegetables were dried. Fruits were preserved. Herbs were stored. Roots were kept in cool places. Nothing could be taken for granted. A poor harvest or severe winter could create hardship. Preparation offered protection against uncertainty. The woman checked several baskets stored along the wall. Everything appeared in good condition. She smiled quietly to herself. Small successes often brought satisfaction. A healthy garden. A repaired garment. A well-stocked pantry. These achievements may have seemed ordinary, yet they helped sustain entire households. Outside, the afternoon slowly advanced. The sun continued its journey across the sky. Long shadows had not yet appeared, but the light was beginning to soften. The hottest part of the day would soon pass. Children played nearby. Their laughter drifted across the yard. Simple games required little equipment. A stick could become a toy. A patch of open ground could become a world of imagination. Life often felt simpler in such moments. The woman paused briefly and watched. Children grew quickly. One year blended into the next. The small child carried in someone's arms eventually became a young person helping with chores. Then came adulthood. Then responsibilities of their own. Time moved steadily, even when individual days felt long. A gentle breeze crossed the landscape. The leaves overhead whispered softly. Clouds drifted across the blue sky. The world seemed calm. Yet life on the early American frontier could also be uncertain. Many communities existed near vast stretches of wilderness. Roads were rough. Travel could be difficult. News sometimes arrived slowly. Families often depended heavily upon neighbors. When help was needed, nearby households frequently worked together. Barns were raised through shared effort. Harvests sometimes involved many hands. Families supported one another during illness or hardship. Community mattered deeply. No household existed entirely alone. The woman knew most of the people living nearby. She recognized their voices. She knew their children. She understood their struggles and joys. The bonds between neighbors often grew strong because daily life required cooperation. In the late afternoon, another task awaited. Spinning. A basket of wool rested near the house. The fibers had been cleaned and prepared earlier. Now they would be transformed into thread. The spinning wheel stood quietly in its usual place. Its wooden frame reflected years of use. The woman sat beside it and began her work. The wheel turned smoothly. Its soft whirring sound blended with the afternoon breeze. Again and again, her hands guided the fibers. The process required skill developed through practice. Thread emerged gradually. Strong. Useful. Ready for future weaving or sewing. Hours could disappear beside a spinning wheel. The repetitive motion encouraged reflection. Many women spent long afternoons working this way. The wheel turning steadily. Sunlight shifting slowly across the room. Outside sounds drifting through open windows. The work may have appeared simple, yet it demanded patience and concentration. The products created through these efforts were essential. Clothing. Blankets. Linens. The fabric of everyday life often began with such quiet labor. The afternoon light became increasingly golden. Sunbeams stretched farther across the floor. Dust motes floated lazily through the air. The spinning wheel continued its steady rhythm. Around the settlement, similar scenes unfolded. Women prepared evening meals. Children completed chores. Farmers finished work in the fields. Animals returned toward barns and shelters. The day gradually moved toward evening. There was something comforting about these transitions. Morning became afternoon. Afternoon became evening. The cycle repeated again and again. People found stability within these familiar patterns. Not every day was easy. Challenges existed. Illness appeared. Storms arrived. Crops sometimes failed. Yet ordinary days continued. Meals were prepared. Gardens were tended. Clothing was mended. Children were cared for. Life moved forward through thousands of small actions. As the sun lowered toward the horizon, the woman finally rose from her spinning wheel. The basket beside her now contained newly spun thread. Another task had been completed. Another quiet contribution to the household. Outside, the light had changed. The world glowed with warm shades of gold. Shadows stretched across the ground. The evening was approaching. And with it came a different kind of peace. As the afternoon slowly faded, the countryside seemed to grow quieter. The bright light of midday softened into gentle shades of gold and amber. Trees cast long shadows across fields. The air cooled little by little. Birds that had been active throughout the day began settling into the branches where they would spend the night. The woman stepped outside and paused for a moment. The evening light was beautiful. It touched the roofs of nearby buildings and turned them golden. It rested upon fences, gardens, and fields. Even ordinary objects seemed softer beneath its glow. For many early American women, evening was not simply the end of work. It was another important part of the day. There were still meals to prepare. Animals needed attention. Water might need carrying once more. The fire required tending. Yet despite these responsibilities, evening often brought a sense of calm that was absent during busier hours. The woman crossed the yard toward the chicken coop. The chickens were already gathering near the entrance. They seemed to understand that night was approaching. One by one they moved inside. Their feathers rustled softly. A few clucks echoed through the quiet air. The woman counted them carefully. Animals represented valuable resources. Keeping them safe mattered greatly. Once satisfied that everything was in order, she secured the coop and continued toward the barn. The scent of hay filled the air. Warm sunlight streamed through small openings in the wooden walls. Dust drifted lazily through golden beams of light. Inside, the animals moved calmly. A cow shifted its weight. A horse flicked its tail. The familiar sounds of the barn created a peaceful atmosphere. The woman checked water supplies. She examined feed. Everything appeared as it should. The routines of care repeated day after day. Because of this consistency, people often noticed immediately when something seemed unusual. A healthy animal behaved in familiar ways. Changes were quickly observed. Experience taught such lessons. The woman returned toward the house carrying a small basket of eggs gathered during the day. The shells reflected the fading sunlight. Each egg would become part of future meals. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was taken lightly. Many necessities required considerable effort to obtain. As evening deepened, preparations for supper began. Inside the house, The fire burned steadily. Its warmth filled the room. Orange light danced across wooden walls. The kettle hung nearby. Simple ingredients waited upon the table. The evening meal was rarely extravagant. Yet it was important. After long hours of work, families gathered together. Food provided nourishment, but meals also offered companionship. The woman sliced vegetables gathered from the garden. Their fresh scent filled the room. Nearby, bread rested upon a wooden board. A pot simmered gently over the fire. Steam rose slowly into the air. The sounds of cooking were soft and comforting. A spoon stirring. Water bubbling. Firewood crackling. These sounds had accompanied countless evenings across early America. Outside, the sky slowly transformed. Blue faded into softer shades. Pink appeared near the horizon. Clouds reflected colors that changed from moment to moment. The beauty of sunset arrived quietly. There was no need for announcements. Nature simply performed its daily ritual. Many people paused briefly to admire it. The woman occasionally glanced through the window as she worked. The colors were beautiful tonight. The sky seemed larger somehow. More peaceful. As darkness gradually approached, family members gathered inside. The day's work was mostly finished. Boots rested near the door. Tools had been put away. The noise of labor slowly disappeared. Everyone settled around the table. The room felt warm and welcoming. The fire provided light. Candles added a gentle glow. Faces appeared softer beneath the flickering illumination. Conversations were often simple. People spoke about the day's work. About weather. About neighbors. About plans for tomorrow. Small details filled these discussions. A repaired fence. A successful harvest. A calf born recently. A visitor expected next week. The rhythm of life moved through such ordinary topics. And yet these ordinary things mattered deeply. They shaped daily existence. They connected families and communities. The evening meal passed slowly. Nobody rushed. There was nowhere urgent to be. Night would arrive soon enough. After supper, dishes were cleared. The woman washed them carefully. Water reflected the flickering candlelight. The task felt familiar after years of repetition. Yet there could be comfort in familiar work. Not every moment needed excitement. Sometimes peace came from knowing exactly what needed to be done. Outside, darkness continued spreading across the countryside. The final colors of sunset faded. Stars began appearing overhead. One at a time. Small points of light emerging from the deepening sky. Far from cities and artificial lights, the night sky often appeared breathtaking. Thousands of stars stretched across the heavens. The Milky Way glowed softly above forests and fields. People looked upward often. The sky was a constant companion. A silent presence above every season and every generation. Once the dishes were finished, quieter evening activities began. The woman returned to her sewing. A child sat nearby listening to an older family member tell stories. The fire continued its gentle crackling. Occasionally someone added another piece of wood. Shadows moved across the room. The atmosphere felt peaceful. Many evenings unfolded this way. Not every night included visitors or special events. Most were simple. Most were ordinary. And perhaps that was part of their comfort. There was safety in routine. The same fire. The same walls. The same familiar voices. The same stars outside the window. Hours passed slowly. The woman stitched another section of fabric. Needle and thread moved steadily. The work required attention but not urgency. Around her, the household relaxed after a long day. Children gradually became sleepy. Their conversations grew quieter. Yawns appeared. Heavy eyelids struggled to remain open. Outside, crickets began their nightly song. The sound drifted through open windows. A soft chorus rising from fields and grass. The countryside belonged to different creatures after dark. Owls called from distant trees. Small animals moved through the undergrowth. The world remained active even while people prepared for rest. Eventually, the sewing was set aside. The day's final chores were completed. The woman checked the fire one last time. Enough wood remained to provide warmth through part of the night. Tomorrow morning she would search for glowing embers beneath the ashes once again. Just as she had done many times before. Just as countless women throughout early America did every day. The household prepared for sleep. Candles were extinguished one by one. Their small flames disappeared into darkness. Only the fire remained. Its faint glow illuminated part of the room. The rest faded into shadow. Outside, the stars shone brightly above the quiet land. The air felt cool. The world seemed still. The woman lay down at last. The work of the day was finished. Her hands had cooked meals, carried water, tended gardens, cared for animals, mended clothing, completed dozens of small tasks that together formed the foundation of daily life. Now there was nothing more to do. Only rest. Only silence. Only the gentle sounds of the night beyond the walls. And as sleep slowly arrived, another ordinary day in early America came to a peaceful end. Morning returned as it always did. Slowly. Quietly. Without ceremony. Long before the sun appeared above the horizon, a faint gray light began spreading across the sky. The stars faded one by one. The darkness softened. Shapes that had been hidden during the night slowly emerged from the shadows. The countryside awakened gently. A cool breeze moved through the trees. Leaves whispered against one another. Somewhere in the distance, a bird offered the first song of the morning. Then another answered. And another. The new day had begun. Inside the small house, the woman stirred beneath her blankets. For a few moments she remained still, listening. The familiar sounds of dawn greeted her. The creaking of old wood. The distant rustling of wind. The quiet breathing of sleeping family members. There was comfort in these sounds. They were part of life. Part of home. Part of a rhythm that repeated day after day and year after year. Soon she rose and stepped onto the wooden floor. The room felt cool after the night. The fire had nearly disappeared. Only a few glowing embers remained beneath layers of ash. As she knelt before the hearth, she could feel the faint warmth still hidden there. Patiently, she added small pieces of dry wood. A few sparks appeared. Tiny flames emerged. Slowly, carefully, the fire returned. Its light spread across the room. Orange reflections danced along the walls. The house seemed to wake with it. Outside, the sky brightened further. A pale ribbon of gold appeared along the eastern horizon. The fields beyond the house shimmered with morning dew. Every blade of grass carried tiny droplets that reflected the growing light. The world looked fresh. Renewed. As though the land itself had rested during the night. The woman opened the door and stepped outside. The cool air touched her face. She paused for a moment. These early hours often felt different from the rest of the day. The world was quieter, calmer, more thoughtful. Before work filled every hour, there was a brief period when nature seemed to belong entirely to itself. Mist drifted across low fields. The trees stood motionless. The sky expanded endlessly above. The beauty of such mornings required no special occasion. It appeared almost every day. Many early American women witnessed countless dawns like this throughout their lives. Though the work was demanding, these small moments of peace often remained close companions. The woman walked toward the garden. Morning moisture covered the leaves. The plants seemed refreshed after the cool night. She examined each row carefully. A habit developed through years of experience. A gardener learned to notice small changes. New growth. Signs of insects. Damage caused by weather. Tiny details often mattered. The garden rewarded attention. A healthy harvest depended upon it. As sunlight gradually spread across the land, the settlement began awakening. Smoke rose from distant chimneys. Doors opened. Voices drifted through the air. Families everywhere were beginning their own routines. Some women were lighting fires. Others were preparing breakfast. Others were already tending animals or carrying water. Though separated by distance, many shared similar responsibilities. The tasks of daily life connected them. Back inside the house, breakfast preparations began once more. The fire now burned steadily. The room felt warmer. Simple ingredients waited nearby. Perhaps there would be porridge this morning. Perhaps fresh bread and milk. The exact meal mattered less than the nourishment it provided. Food represented energy. Energy meant work. And work filled most hours of the day. As breakfast cooked, sunlight entered through the windows. The beams slowly crossed the floor. They illuminated objects that had served the family for years. Wooden bowls. Iron pots. Handmade chairs. A spinning wheel resting quietly in the corner. Each item carried a story. Many had been built, repaired, and cared for by the family itself. Nothing existed merely for decoration. Every object earned its place through usefulness. After breakfast, attention turned toward one of the most important activities of the season. Bread making. The woman gathered flour from storage. The fine powder slipped through her fingers as she measured it carefully. Nearby, water warmed gently. A large wooden bowl waited upon the table. Bread was a staple food in many households. Making it required knowledge, patience, and practice. The process began simply enough. Ingredients were combined. The dough slowly formed. Then came kneading. Again and again, the woman pressed and folded the dough. Her hands moved with confidence. Years of experience guided every motion. There was no need to rush. Good bread demanded time. The dough rested while the fire prepared the oven. The scent of warm wood filled the room. Outside, sunlight continued brightening the countryside. The day promised fair weather once again. A wagon rolled along a nearby road. The distant sound of wheels briefly interrupted the morning quiet. Travelers occasionally passed through the area. News often traveled this way. Not through newspapers arriving instantly from faraway places, but through conversations. Visitors carried stories from neighboring towns. Information spread slowly. One person told another. Then another. Communities remained connected through these simple exchanges. While waiting for the bread, the woman continued with other tasks. A basket of clothing required mending. Several garments had become worn through daily use. Children grew quickly. Sleeves became too short. Hems required adjustment. Buttons needed replacing. Few things remained unchanged for long. Clothing represented many hours of labor. Fabric could not be wasted. Every piece deserved care. The woman sat near the window where natural light made sewing easier. The needle moved steadily. Thread passed through fabric. A small tear disappeared beneath careful stitches. Outside, birds moved among nearby trees. Their songs floated through the open window. The sound blended with the gentle rhythm of sewing. Morning passed peacefully. The bread eventually emerged from the oven. Its rich aroma filled the house. Freshly baked bread carried a special kind of comfort. The scent spread into every corner of the room. Warm. Familiar. Welcoming. The loaves were placed upon a wooden surface to cool. Their golden crusts reflected the sunlight. For a moment, the woman admired her work. Not with pride exactly. More with quiet satisfaction. Another task completed. Another contribution to the household. The simple accomplishments of daily life often brought their own rewards. By late morning, the sun stood higher in the sky. The coolness of dawn had faded. Warmth spread across fields and gardens. The settlement became more active. Children played. Neighbors worked. Animals wandered through yards and pastures. Life moved steadily forward. The woman stepped outside carrying a basket. Today she planned to gather herbs. Near the edge of the property, several useful plants grew naturally. Others had been cultivated intentionally. Knowledge of herbs remained important in many households. Certain plants flavored food. Others were used in household remedies. Women often learned these skills from older generations. Experience taught which plants were helpful and which should be avoided. The basket gradually filled. The fresh scent of herbs rose into the air. Mint. Sage. Other familiar plants. Each carried its own purpose. Each connected daily life to the natural world. As she worked beneath the bright morning sky, the woman listened to the sounds around her. The rustling leaves. The singing birds. The distant voices. The steady hum of insects. Together they formed the soundtrack of ordinary life. Simple sounds. Gentle sounds. The kind of sounds that surrounded early American women almost every day. And as the morning slowly gave way to afternoon, another chapter of their quiet and hard-working lives continued to unfold beneath the wide and peaceful sky. The afternoon arrived gently, carried by the steady passage of the sun across the sky. The bright freshness of morning slowly gave way to warmer, softer light. Shadows shortened beneath trees and fences. The air became still. Even the birds seemed quieter during these hours, resting among branches while the day reached its fullest brightness. The woman returned to the house with her basket of herbs. Their scent followed her inside. Fresh mint mingled with the smell of bread that had cooled upon the table. Sage added its earthy fragrance to the room. The simple wooden house felt alive with the sense of food, plants, smoke, and sunlight. These were the smells of everyday life. Not grand. Not remarkable. Yet deeply familiar. The herbs would be dried and stored for future use. Nothing was gathered without purpose. Every plant, every vegetable, every handful of grain represented work. Because work was valuable, resources were treated with care. The woman spread the herbs carefully across a cloth near the window. Sunlight touched the leaves. The process would take time. Many tasks in early America required patience. People could not hurry the drying of herbs. They could not rush the changing of seasons. They could not command crops to grow faster. Nature moved according to its own schedule, and people learned to move with it. Outside, the day continued. A warm breeze drifted through the settlement. Leaves rustled softly. Clouds moved slowly across the sky. Their shadows traveled across distant fields like silent visitors. The woman picked up a wooden pail and stepped outside once more. Today there was another chore waiting. The cow needed milking. The path to the barn was familiar. Every step had been walked countless times before. The grass beside the path swayed gently. Butterflies drifted among wildflowers. A bee moved from blossom to blossom, carrying out its own quiet work. The world seemed peaceful. Inside the barn, the air felt cooler. The scent of hay filled the space. Sunlight entered through narrow openings between wooden boards, creating bright stripes of light across the floor. Dust floated through these beams like tiny golden stars. The cow stood calmly. The woman settled onto a small stool and began her work. The sounds were soft and steady. Milk striking the bucket. Animals shifting gently. The occasional creak of old wood. It was work that demanded attention but offered moments for thought. Many women spent hours each week caring for animals. The tasks became second nature. They required skill, consistency, and patience. The milk would later become part of meals. Some might be used for butter. Some for cheese. Some simply for drinking. Every product had value. Every task connected to another. Daily life formed a chain of responsibilities, each linked to the next. When the milking was finished, the woman carried the bucket back toward the house. The afternoon sun warmed her shoulders. The sky remained clear. Only a few clouds drifted lazily overhead. Summer days often felt long. There seemed to be enough daylight for many activities. Winter was different. Winter compressed the hours. Darkness arrived earlier. Work had to be organized differently. But during these warmer months, the sun remained a reliable companion for much of the day. Inside the house, preparations for butter making began. The process required effort. Milk and cream were transformed through patient labor. A churn stood ready. The woman began the familiar motion. Again and again. Steady. Rhythmic. Unhurried. The sound of churning filled the room. The task could take considerable time. Yet this was common. Many household responsibilities involved repetition. The same movements. The same routines. The same gradual progress. In such work, patience was not merely helpful. It was necessary. Outside, children played beneath the shade of a large tree. Their laughter occasionally drifted through the open window. They chased one another across the grass. They invented games from simple objects. A stick became a sword. A stone became treasure. A patch of ground became an entire world. Children often found joy in ordinary things. Their imaginations filled the gaps left by limited possessions. The woman smiled faintly when she heard them. The sound of children at play brought warmth to any home. Life could be difficult at times. There were hardships. There were losses. There were uncertainties. Yet there were also moments like these. Simple moments. Small moments. The kind that quietly brightened ordinary days. The afternoon continued. The butter eventually formed. Another task completed. Another necessity prepared. The woman carefully stored the finished product. The household supply slowly grew through such efforts. Nothing appeared suddenly. Everything was created through work. As the sun moved westward, the quality of light began changing once more. The brightest hours were passing. Golden tones slowly returned to the landscape. The fields seemed softer now. The trees cast longer shadows. The world appeared calmer. The woman stepped outside and walked toward the edge of the property. From there, she could see a wide stretch of countryside. Rolling fields. Clusters of trees. A winding path disappearing into the distance. The view changed throughout the year. Spring painted everything green. Summer deepened the colors. Autumn brought gold and crimson. Winter covered the land with white. Each season transformed the same landscape into something new. Yet beneath these changes, certain things remained constant. The hills remained. The rivers continued their journeys. The sky stretched endlessly overhead. Generations came and went beneath that sky. The woman stood quietly for a few moments. Not because she had finished all her work. There was always more work. But because sometimes it felt good simply to pause. To look. To listen. To exist within the landscape rather than constantly moving through it. The wind carried the scent of grass and earth. A hawk circled high above. Far away, a wagon moved along a road, appearing small against the vastness of the land. The afternoon felt endless. Peaceful. Steady. The kind of afternoon that seemed ordinary while it was happening but would later become a cherished memory. Soon, the woman turned back toward the house. Evening was still some distance away, but its arrival could already be felt. The light was changing. The shadows were growing. The day was quietly preparing to become night. And like every day before it, this day continued its slow journey through the familiar rhythms of early American life. As the afternoon slowly drifted toward evening, the pace of the household began to change. The busiest hours were passing. The intense brightness of midday softened into warmer colors. Sunlight spread across the fields like liquid gold. The edges of trees glowed softly. Long shadows stretched across the ground, reaching farther with each passing hour. The woman returned to the garden once more. A gardener rarely visited only once each day. Plants required regular attention. The garden was always changing. New flowers appeared. Vegetables ripened. Weeds emerged unexpectedly. The earth itself seemed alive with constant activity. She moved slowly between the rows. The soil felt warm beneath her shoes. A few vegetables were ready to harvest. Carefully, she gathered them into a basket. Green beans. A few onions. Several squash that had reached the proper size. The basket gradually became heavier. The harvest was modest, but it was enough. Small harvests collected day after day often supplied a large portion of a family's food. Nothing happened all at once. The garden rewarded steady effort. The woman paused near a row of herbs. The afternoon breeze carried their fragrance through the air. Mint. Thyme. Sage. The scents mixed with the smell of warm earth and growing plants. There was something deeply comforting about a well-kept garden. It reflected patience, care, attention. The work invested during previous weeks revealed itself through healthy growth. Nearby, bees moved from flower to flower. They worked with quiet determination. Their small bodies disappeared among blossoms before emerging once again. The woman watched them briefly. Nature was always busy. Even when people rested, countless living things continued their work. The sun lowered further. The sky began showing the first hints of evening. The blue above seemed softer now. Gentler. The woman carried the basket toward the house. The vegetables would become part of the evening meal. Fresh food was always welcome. Inside, preparation slowly began. Cooking in early America often required planning. The fire needed attention. Ingredients had to be gathered. Water had to be available. Meals rarely appeared quickly. Every step demanded effort. The woman placed the vegetables upon the table and began cleaning them. Water splashed softly into a basin. The vegetables glistened beneath the fading sunlight. Nearby, a pot waited over the fire. Soon the room filled with familiar sounds. The chopping of vegetables. The crackling of burning wood. The gentle bubbling of water. These sounds had echoed through homes for generations. Simple sounds. Peaceful sounds. The sounds of daily life. While supper cooked, the woman turned her attention to another important task. Candle making. Light was precious. Once darkness arrived, families depended upon candles and firelight. Without them, evenings would become very short indeed. Many households produced their own candles whenever possible. The process required time and materials. Yet the results were valuable. A single candle could extend useful hours after sunset. The woman examined several candles already completed. They would provide light for future evenings. Perhaps during sewing. Perhaps during reading. Perhaps during quiet conversations beside the fire. Every candle represented preparation for days yet to come. Preparation was woven into nearly every aspect of life. People thought ahead constantly. Winter supplies. Stored food. Repaired tools. Extra firewood. Future needs remained close to everyone's mind. Outside, the sounds of the settlement shifted. The activity of afternoon gradually faded. Farm work began winding down. Animals returned toward barns and pens. Roads became quieter. The day seemed to exhale slowly. The woman stepped outside carrying scraps from meal preparation. The air felt cooler now. The change was subtle but noticeable. Summer afternoons could be warm, yet evenings often brought relief. The sky stretched above her in shades of pale gold and soft blue. Clouds reflected delicate colors near the horizon. A few children still played nearby, though their energy was beginning to fade. Long days often ended with tired feet and sleepy eyes. The woman smiled as she watched them. Childhood possessed its own rhythm. Days seemed endless. Seasons seemed slow. Years stretched ahead like open roads. Adults understood differently. They knew how quickly seasons passed. How rapidly children grew. How one year blended into the next. The vegetables simmered gently inside the house. Their aroma drifted through open windows. The scent mixed with fresh evening air. Together they created a feeling of home. As sunset approached, family members gradually gathered. Work in the fields ended. Tools were stored. Animals were cared for. The responsibilities of the day had largely been completed. The evening meal would soon begin. The woman arranged simple dishes upon the table. Everything was modest. Everything was practical. Yet there was dignity in such simplicity. The food had been grown, gathered, prepared, and preserved through countless hours of labor. Nothing appeared by accident. Every meal represented the combined efforts of many days. The family took their places. Conversation remained gentle. Nobody felt rushed. Outside, the final moments of daylight unfolded across the landscape. The horizon glowed warmly. Trees became dark silhouettes against the sky. Birds returned to their nests. The world settled gradually toward rest. After supper, the dishes would be washed. The fire would be tended. The evening would continue with its quieter routines. But for now, there was only this moment. The table. The food. The family gathered together. The fading light beyond the windows. The woman looked around the room. The walls were simple. The furniture was plain. The possessions were few. Yet the house contained something valuable. Warmth. Comfort. Belonging. The kind of wealth that could not be counted or measured. Outside, the first star appeared in the evening sky. Small. Bright. Steady. Soon more would follow. Night was approaching once again. And another peaceful evening in early America was about to begin. The evening settled gently over the countryside. The last traces of sunlight slowly faded beyond the horizon. The golden fields turned gray. The distant trees became dark outlines against the deepening sky. One by one, stars appeared overhead, shining with a quiet brightness that seemed stronger in a world untouched by electric lights. Inside the house, the warmth of the hearth created a small circle of comfort against the growing darkness. The evening meal had ended. The dishes were being washed. Water rippled softly inside a wooden basin. Firelight reflected across its surface in dancing patterns. The familiar work continued without hurry. Many early American women spent the final hours of the day completing small tasks left unfinished during daylight. The larger chores were done. The animals had been cared for. The garden rested beneath the night sky. The fields stood silent. Now came the quieter work. The woman dried a wooden bowl and placed it carefully upon a shelf. Every item had its place. Order made daily life easier. When tools could be found quickly, work moved more smoothly. When supplies were organized, nothing valuable was forgotten. Such habits developed naturally through years of experience. The fire crackled softly nearby. Its light flickered across the room. The moving shadows gave the walls a gentle, almost living quality. Outside, crickets had begun their nightly song. The sound drifted through the darkness like a steady blanket of music. Some people hardly noticed it after hearing it every evening. Others found it comforting. A reminder that nature continued its own quiet routines after the day's labor was complete. The woman settled into a chair near the hearth. Beside her rested a basket filled with mending. Clothing rarely lasted forever. Hard work placed strain upon fabric. Sleeves wore thin. Seams loosened. Small tears appeared. Replacing garments was difficult and expensive. Repairing them was far more practical. The woman threaded a needle. The firelight illuminated her hands. Patiently, she began sewing. The motion was familiar. Steady. Calm. Needle and thread moved together in a rhythm that required little thought after years of practice. Many evenings passed this way. A chair near the fire. A basket of work. The gentle sounds of family nearby. It was not exciting. It was not dramatic. Yet it formed an important part of life. Comfort often grows from repetition. From familiar routines. From ordinary moments repeated across many years. Nearby, children listened as an older family member told stories. Stories were valuable entertainment. They required no special equipment. No purchased tickets. No complicated preparations. Only a voice and willing listeners. Some stories described family memories. Others spoke of distant places. Some told lessons passed from one generation to the next. The stories traveled through time carried by words alone. The woman listened while she sewed. Certain stories had been heard many times before. Yet familiar stories often remained enjoyable. People found comfort in hearing them again. Just as they found comfort in familiar songs or familiar places. Outside, the night deepened. The moon slowly rose above the horizon. Its pale light spread across fields and rooftops. Silver shadows appeared beneath trees. The landscape took on a different character after dark. The same roads. The same fields. The same forests. Yet everything seemed quieter. More mysterious. More peaceful. The woman glanced through the window. The moonlight was beautiful tonight. The world appeared calm beneath its glow. A cool breeze moved through the leaves. Branches swayed gently. The sounds of the day had almost completely disappeared. No wagons passed along the road. No tools struck wood. No voices carried from distant fields. Only the sounds of night remained. The sewing continued. Slowly, another garment was repaired. Another useful item preserved for future use. Such work may have seemed small. Yet households depended upon thousands of these small acts. One repaired sleeve. One preserved jar of food. One bucket of water. One loaf of bread. Individually they appeared insignificant. Together they formed the foundation of daily life. As the evening progressed, the children gradually became sleepy. Their conversations grew quieter. Their heads nodded occasionally. The warmth of the fire encouraged relaxation. The long day had exhausted them. The woman smiled softly. Children often fought against sleep. Yet sleep arrived eventually. Just as morning always arrived after night. The rhythms of life rarely changed. Outside, the stars multiplied across the sky. Without bright artificial lights, the heavens appeared vast. Endless. Countless stars stretched from horizon to horizon. Many early American women became deeply familiar with the night sky. They saw it often. They recognized seasonal patterns. They watched constellations move across the year. The stars became companions during evening chores and early morning work. The woman set aside her sewing for a moment and stepped outside. The air felt cool against her skin. Above her, the sky shimmered with light. The Milky Way stretched across the darkness like a pale river. The sight never grew old. No matter how many times she had seen it. The night carried a special kind of silence. Not complete silence. Nature was still active. An owl called from a distant tree. Crickets sang from the grass. Leaves rustled softly in the breeze. Yet compared to the busy hours of daylight, the world felt remarkably still. She stood quietly for a few moments. Simply looking. Simply listening. There was no task demanding immediate attention. No chore requiring completion. Only the peaceful presence of the night. Eventually she returned inside. The fire had burned lower. The room glowed with softer light now. Family members were preparing for sleep. Candles were extinguished one at a time. Each small flame disappeared, leaving deeper shadows behind. The woman checked the door. She arranged a few items for tomorrow morning. Small preparations made the next day easier. Then she approached the hearth. The fire would not be allowed to burn completely out. A few larger pieces of wood remained. Beneath them, hidden embers would hopefully survive until dawn. Tomorrow morning she would wake before sunrise. She would kneel beside the hearth once again. She would coax the fire back to life. The cycle would continue. As it had yesterday. As it would tomorrow. as it had for countless women throughout early America. The household grew quiet. Very quiet. Only the occasional crackle of the fire disturbed the stillness. The woman lay down at last. The blanket felt warm. The room felt safe. Outside, the stars continued their slow journey across the sky. The moon climbed higher. The countryside rested peacefully beneath its silver light. The work of the day was finished. The garden slept. The animals rested. The fields waited for another sunrise. And within the small wooden house, surrounded by familiar walls and familiar sounds, the woman closed her eyes and drifted gently into sleep while the calm night watched over the land. The night passed quietly. Above the sleeping countryside, the stars continued their slow movement across the sky. The moon drifted beyond the treetops and cast pale light upon empty roads, silent fields, and dark rooftops. Most of the world rested. Inside the small house, the fire had burned low. Only a faint red glow remained beneath the ashes. The room was still. The air felt cool. For several peaceful hours, there was nothing to do and nowhere to go. The demands of the day had paused. The chores had ended. The tools rested where they had been placed. Everything waited for morning. Eventually, the darkness began to change. At first, the difference was almost impossible to notice. The black sky softened into deep blue. The stars nearest the horizon began to disappear. The eastern edge of the world grew slightly lighter. A new day was approaching. The woman awoke before sunrise. This was common. Much of life followed the sun. To make the most of daylight, people often rose early and rested soon after darkness arrived. She sat quietly for a moment, listening to the familiar silence before dawn. These moments felt different from any other part of the day. The world seemed suspended between night and morning. Neither fully asleep nor fully awake. Outside, a breeze moved gently through the trees. The leaves whispered softly. A distant owl called one final time before retreating from the coming daylight. The woman wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and crossed the room. The floorboards creaked quietly beneath her feet. She knelt before the hearth. The ashes looked cold. Gray. Still. But beneath them, hidden from view, she hoped a few embers remained alive. Carefully, she moved the ashes aside. A faint glow appeared. Then another. Tiny points of red light. The fire had survived the night. A small smile crossed her face. She added dry kindling. Thin pieces of wood. Patiently she blew upon the embers. A spark appeared. Then a flame. Soon the familiar crackling sound filled the room once again. Morning had begun. The growing fire spread warmth through the house. Orange light danced across walls that had witnessed countless mornings just like this one. Generations often lived within the same rhythms. Parents taught children. Children grew into adults. The routines continued. Some details changed over time. Many remained the same. Outside, dawn slowly unfolded. Mist covered low areas of the countryside. Fields appeared almost dreamlike beneath the pale light. The world looked soft and quiet. The woman stepped outside carrying an empty bucket. The cool air greeted her immediately. She paused for a moment and looked toward the horizon. The first hints of gold were appearing there. Birds had not yet fully begun their morning songs. Everything remained calm. She walked toward the well. The path was familiar. Years of use had worn it smooth. Grass lined both sides. Small wildflowers grew here and there, unnoticed by many travelers but beautiful all the same. The bucket swung gently at her side. As she walked, the sounds of the waking countryside slowly increased. A single bird began singing. Another answered from a nearby tree. Soon several voices joined together. Morning music spread through the landscape. The well stood quietly beneath the brightening sky. The woman lowered the bucket carefully. The rope slid through her hands. A distant splash echoed upward. Then came the steady effort of pulling the bucket back. Water was heavy. It always had been. Yet carrying it remained one of the most essential tasks of daily life. No matter the season. No matter the weather. Water was needed. The woman balanced the bucket and began the journey home. The surface of the water reflected the growing light of dawn. Small ripples moved gently with each step. Back at the house, breakfast preparations soon began. The fire burned steadily now. Its warmth filled the room. The scent of smoke mingled with the cool freshness that entered through the open door. Simple ingredients were gathered. Nothing elaborate. Nothing wasteful. The meals of early America were often straightforward. Food served a purpose. It nourished the body. It sustained long hours of work. Yet even simple meals carried their own comforts. Warm bread. Fresh milk. Porridge simmering over a fire. These foods appeared regularly on household tables. As breakfast cooked, the woman tidied the room. Blankets were folded. Chairs were straightened. Items returned to their proper places. Order helped create calm. A tidy home made daily responsibilities easier. Many women took pride in maintaining such order, even when resources were limited. Sunlight finally appeared above the horizon. Golden rays entered through the windows. The room brightened immediately. The new day stretched ahead. Full of tasks yet unfinished. Full of work still waiting. Yet there was no sense of hurry. The day would unfold 1 hour at a time. One task at a time. Just as every day had before it. Outside, the settlement awakened fully. Smoke rose from neighboring chimneys. Voices drifted through the air. A wagon rattled along a distant road. Animals stirred within barns and fields. Life resumed its familiar rhythm. The woman stepped into the yard and looked around. The garden awaited attention. Laundry would eventually need washing. Food preparation would continue. Perhaps there would be sewing later. Perhaps spinning. Perhaps preserving food. The exact work varied from day to day. Yet the overall pattern remained steady. Responsibility followed responsibility. Season followed season. Year followed year. And through it all, women played an essential role in maintaining the household. Their labor often went unnoticed by distant observers. There were no grand celebrations for washing clothes. No monuments built for baking bread. No public honors for carrying water or mending garments. Yet these ordinary tasks sustained families and communities. Without them, daily life could not function. The woman walked toward the garden once again. Morning sunlight sparkled upon leaves still wet with dew. The air smelled fresh and clean. A rabbit darted across a nearby field before disappearing into tall grass. The world seemed alive with quiet activity. She knelt beside a row of vegetables and began her work. Her hands moved confidently. Experience guided every motion. This was not new work. It was familiar work. The kind that became woven into daily existence. Around her, the countryside continued waking beneath the brightening sky. Birds filled the air with song. Clouds drifted lazily overhead. The sun climbed steadily higher. Another ordinary day in early America had begun. And like countless days before it, it would be built from simple moments, steady effort, and the quiet strength of women whose lives moved in harmony with the land, the seasons, and the gentle rhythm of time itself. The morning grew brighter with every passing hour. Sunlight spread across the countryside, warming the fields and gardens that had glistened with dew only a short time before. The mist that lingered over low ground slowly disappeared. Birds continued their songs from fence posts and tree branches. The world felt awake now. The woman remained in the garden. She moved carefully between rows of vegetables, examining the plants one by one. Her hands brushed gently against leaves. She removed weeds that had appeared during the past few days. She loosened the soil around certain plants so their roots could breathe more easily. It was patient work. Quiet work. The kind of work that rewarded attention. Gardens often reflected the care they received. Neglect could be seen quickly. So could dedication. Many women spent countless hours tending these small plots of land. They understood how important they were. A successful garden could provide food for many months. Every healthy plant mattered. The morning breeze carried the scent of growing things. Fresh soil. Green leaves. Wildflowers blooming near the edge of the yard. The smells blended together beneath the warm sunlight. Nearby, bees traveled steadily from flower to flower. Their work seemed endless. Yet they never appeared rushed. They simply moved from one blossom to the next. The woman often noticed such things. People who spent much of their lives outdoors became familiar with nature's patterns. They observed the behavior of birds, the movements of insects, the arrival of clouds, the changing color of leaves. The natural world was not something distant. It was a daily companion. After some time, she stood and stretched her back. The garden looked healthy today. That brought quiet satisfaction. There was always more work to do, but it was pleasant to see evidence that effort was producing results. She picked up a basket and began gathering vegetables that were ready for harvest. Each one was placed carefully inside. Nothing was tossed carelessly. Food represented too much labor to be treated without respect. The basket slowly filled. The vegetables reflected the sunlight. Their colors seemed rich and vibrant against the woven reeds of the basket. By late morning, the sun stood high enough to cast shorter shadows. The warmth increased. The woman carried the basket toward the house. Inside, the air remained cooler. The thick wooden walls helped protect against the heat of summer days. She placed the vegetables upon the table and examined them. Some would be eaten soon. Others might be preserved. Planning ahead was a constant part of life. A woman often thought not only about today's meal but also about future weeks and months. Summer abundance had to support winter survival. The harvest season was never entirely about the present. It was also about preparing for what lay ahead. The woman selected several vegetables and began preparing them for drying. This process required care. The food needed proper airflow. It needed protection from moisture. It needed time. Like many household tasks, success depended upon patience. There were no shortcuts. Only steady work. Outside, the settlement continued its daily routine. Children carried water. Men worked in fields or workshops. Women tended homes, gardens, animals, and countless other responsibilities. The sounds of activity drifted across the countryside. Axes striking wood. Voices calling to one another. The occasional creak of wagon wheels. Yet even during busy hours, there was often a sense of calm. People worked steadily rather than frantically. The pace of life followed the rhythm of daylight. As the vegetables were arranged, the woman turned her attention toward another task. Today, part of the morning would be devoted to spinning. The spinning wheel stood waiting near a window. Sunlight illuminated its smooth wooden surface. Years of use had polished certain areas where hands frequently touched the wood. The woman sat down and began. The wheel turned. Its familiar humming sound filled the room. Soft, steady, comforting. Fiber moved through her fingers. Thread slowly formed. The process seemed simple when performed by someone experienced, but it required skill developed through years of practice. Many essential household items began this way. Thread became cloth. Cloth became clothing. Blankets. Aprons. Curtains. The products of countless hours of labor eventually surrounded everyday life. The spinning wheel continued its gentle rhythm. Outside, a bird landed upon the windowsill. For a moment, it peered inside. Then it flew away. The woman barely noticed. She was focused on her work. The repetitive motion encouraged quiet reflection. Thoughts drifted naturally during such tasks. There was no need for constant conversation. No need for entertainment. The work itself occupied the hands while the mind wandered peacefully. Hours sometimes passed this way. One small task blending into another. The sunlight gradually shifting across the room. The sounds of the outside world changing as the day progressed. Eventually, the woman paused. A good amount of thread had been produced. She examined it briefly. Strong. Even. Useful. Another task completed. Another contribution to the household. She stood and walked toward the doorway. Outside, the sky remained bright blue. A few clouds floated lazily above the fields. The air carried the distant scent of freshly cut grass. Somewhere nearby, a neighbor was working. The sound of a hammer echoed faintly across the landscape. The woman stepped onto the porch and sat for a moment. Not because she was idle. Simply because brief pauses were part of life too. The body welcomed occasional rest. The mind appreciated moments of stillness. From where she sat, she could see much of the surrounding countryside. Fields stretched into the distance. Trees marked the edges of properties. A narrow road wound through the landscape. The view was familiar. She had seen it in every season. Under bright summer skies. Beneath autumn colors. Through winter snow. During spring rains. The land changed constantly, yet somehow remained the same. A gentle breeze touched her face. The leaves overhead rustled softly. The sounds of the settlement seemed distant now. For a few peaceful moments, there was only the wind, the sunlight, and the wide open sky. Soon enough, the day's work would continue. There would be meals to prepare. Clothing to mend. Supplies to organize. The afternoon still held many responsibilities. But for now, the woman simply sat quietly and watched the clouds drift across the endless blue above the early American countryside, while another ordinary and peaceful morning slowly gave way to the warmth of afternoon. The afternoon arrived with a gentle warmth that settled across the countryside. The sun stood high above the fields, casting a bright and steady light over farms, gardens, and winding dirt roads. The morning coolness had disappeared now. The air felt softer, heavier, carrying the scent of grass warmed by sunlight. The woman rose from her brief rest and returned to her work. There was always something waiting to be done. Not because life was rushed. Not because anyone demanded constant motion. but because a household required steady attention. Small responsibilities appeared throughout every day. Together, they filled the hours. Inside the house, the fire had been allowed to burn lower during the warmer part of the day. Only enough heat remained for simple cooking tasks. During summer months, people often welcomed any opportunity to keep extra heat from filling the home. The woman gathered several baskets and examined their contents. Some held dried herbs. Others contained onions harvested earlier in the season. A few stored beans and grains carefully preserved from previous harvests. Storage required organization. Families depended upon supplies lasting as long as possible. A forgotten basket could spoil. A poorly stored sack of grain could attract pests. Attention to detail mattered. The woman moved slowly from shelf to shelf. She inspected each container. Adjusted a cloth cover. Rearranged several items. The work seemed small, yet it protected many hours of labor. Outside, the sounds of afternoon drifted through the open window. A distant dog barked. Birds called from nearby trees. The breeze occasionally carried voices from neighboring farms. Life continued all around her. Every household engaged in its own rhythm. Every family attended to its own responsibilities. Yet together they formed a larger community. In many early American settlements, neighbors relied upon one another. Roads could be rough. Travel could be difficult. Resources were sometimes limited. Cooperation often made life easier. People shared tools, exchanged news, offered assistance during harvests or difficult seasons. The woman thought about a nearby neighbor while she worked. Perhaps she would visit soon. Perhaps there would be an opportunity to exchange preserves, fabric, or simple household goods. Such visits served practical purposes, but they also provided companionship. Life could sometimes feel isolated, especially in rural areas where homes stood far apart. Conversations with neighbors brought variety to ordinary days. After finishing her work with the storage shelves, the woman stepped outside once again. The sunlight seemed brighter after being indoors. She shaded her eyes and looked toward the barn. Several tasks remained there. The path led through a patch of grass where butterflies drifted lazily among small wildflowers. Nature seemed unhurried this afternoon. Even the clouds moved slowly. Inside the barn, the familiar scent of hay greeted her. Sunlight entered through narrow gaps in the wooden walls. Bright beams crossed the floor and illuminated tiny particles floating in the air. The animals rested quietly. A horse stood beneath the shade. A cow chewed slowly. The peaceful atmosphere made the barn feel almost like a world separate from everything outside. The woman checked feed supplies. She examined water containers. She looked over the animals carefully. Years of experience had taught her to notice small changes. A healthy animal had a certain appearance. A certain way of moving. A certain expression. Problems often revealed themselves through subtle signs. Observation was an important skill. Many women developed it naturally through daily care. Satisfied that everything was well, she returned to the house carrying a small basket of eggs gathered from the chickens. The smooth shells felt cool in her hands. Each egg represented another small contribution to the household. Simple things mattered. They always had. Back inside, the eggs were placed carefully into storage. Nothing could be wasted. A dropped egg meant lost food. A broken jar meant lost supplies. People learned to handle possessions thoughtfully because replacing them often required effort. The afternoon continued its slow journey. Sunlight moved gradually across the floor. Shadows shifted. The sounds outside changed almost without notice. The woman sat near a window and picked up a piece of fabric she had been working on for several days. It would eventually become part of a quilt. Quilts were more than blankets. They represented patience. Many were created from scraps saved over long periods of time. Pieces of old clothing. Unused fabric. Materials too valuable to discard. The woman examined the pieces carefully. Each one fit into a larger pattern. Needle and thread moved steadily. The fabric slowly took shape. The work required concentration, yet it also felt peaceful. Hours could pass quietly while sewing. The movement of the needle became almost meditative. In. Out. In. Out. Steady. Reliable. Calm. Outside, the afternoon sunlight softened slightly. The day was beginning its slow transition toward evening. Though there were still several hours of daylight remaining, subtle changes had already begun. The shadows lengthened. The air cooled just a little. The brightness lost some of its intensity. The woman continued sewing. A child entered the room briefly, carrying a small collection of interesting stones gathered from the yard. The child proudly displayed each one. The woman smiled and listened. To a child, even ordinary stones could seem like treasures. The simple discoveries of childhood filled many days with wonder. After a few minutes, the child ran outside again. The house became quiet once more. The woman returned to her sewing. The afternoon drifted onward. One stitch followed another. One piece joined the next. The quilt grew little by little. Much of life worked this way. Not through sudden changes. Not through dramatic moments. But through steady effort repeated over time. A garden flourished through daily care. A home remained comfortable through constant attention. A quilt appeared through thousands of stitches. Small actions accumulated. Days became months. Months became years. And before anyone realized it, entire lives had been built from these ordinary moments. The woman paused and looked out the window. The sky remained clear. The fields stretched peacefully toward the horizon. A hawk glided high above the countryside, barely moving its wings. The sight was calming. There was beauty in simple things. A quiet afternoon. A gentle breeze. Sunlight on a field. The steady progress of familiar work. As the afternoon continued toward evening, the woman picked up her needle once more. The quilt rested across her lap. The room remained peaceful. And another chapter of ordinary life unfolded quietly within the small home, beneath the wide American sky that watched over countless women living similar days, filled with patience, work, and quiet grace. The afternoon slowly began to lean toward evening. The change happened so gradually that it was easy to miss at first. The sunlight remained bright, yet its color had softened. The shadows beneath trees stretched a little farther than they had an hour before. The air felt gentler. Even the sounds of the countryside seemed to settle into a quieter rhythm. The woman carefully folded the quilt pieces and placed them back into their basket. There would be more time for sewing later. There was always more sewing. The work never truly disappeared. It simply waited patiently for the next available moment. She stood and crossed the room. The wooden floor creaked softly beneath her feet. The house felt comfortable in the afternoon light. Sunbeams rested across the table. Dust drifted lazily through the air. The fire in the hearth had burned low, providing only a faint warmth now. Summer afternoons often encouraged people to spend as much time outdoors as possible. Fresh air felt welcome. The woman stepped outside and looked toward the orchard near the edge of the property. A few fruit trees stood there. Not many. Just enough to provide part of the family's needs. The trees had become familiar companions over the years. She knew each one. She knew which produced the sweetest fruit, which blossomed first in spring, which branches needed attention after winter storms. The orchard reflected the passing of time in its own way. Each year added another ring beneath the bark. Each season left its mark. Walking toward the trees, she listened to the sounds around her. Grasshoppers moved through the tall grass. Birds called occasionally from distant branches. Leaves rustled overhead. The countryside possessed its own language. A language of wind and wings and growing things. People who spent their lives close to nature learned to understand it. The woman reached the orchard and paused beneath the shade. The air felt cooler here. Sunlight filtered through the leaves and created shifting patterns on the ground. Small patches of gold appeared and disappeared as the branches moved. The fruit was developing well this season. Some still needed time. Others were nearly ready. Harvests rarely arrived all at once. Nature preferred gradual progress. One day a fruit seemed unripe. A few days later it was ready to gather. Patience remained one of the most valuable skills a person could possess. The woman collected several pieces of fruit and placed them into her basket. Their scent was fresh and pleasant. A reminder of summer's generosity. Food gathering often brought quiet satisfaction. There was comfort in seeing the results of months of care. The blossoms of spring had become the fruits of summer. The labor invested earlier in the year now returned its reward. After some time, she made her way back toward the house. The basket felt heavier now. The afternoon sun warmed her shoulders. Clouds drifted slowly overhead, casting moving shadows across the fields. The land seemed peaceful. Almost timeless. Inside the house, she placed the fruit upon the table. Some would be eaten soon. Others might be preserved for future months. Every season carried the responsibility of preparing for the next. Summer prepared for autumn. Autumn prepared for winter. Winter prepared for spring. The cycle never ended. One season flowed naturally into another. The woman began sorting the fruit carefully. The best pieces would be stored. Any damaged fruit would be used quickly. Nothing useful would be wasted. This practical approach shaped much of daily life. Resources mattered. Effort mattered. Careful planning mattered. While she worked, voices drifted from outside. Several neighbors were passing along the road. Travel was slower in those days. People often stopped to exchange greetings. Conversations happened naturally. News traveled from person to person. A visitor might carry information from a nearby town. A traveler might share stories heard elsewhere. The world felt larger then. Distances seemed greater. Information moved at the pace of horses, wagons, and walking feet. The woman stepped outside to greet the neighbors. The exchange was simple and friendly. A few words. A few smiles. Questions about crops and weather. Comments about the season. Nothing dramatic. Just the ordinary conversations that connected communities together. These small interactions helped strengthen relationships. Neighbors often became important parts of daily life. They offered help during difficult times. Shared celebrations during joyful moments. Exchanged advice and resources. Community provided comfort in a world where many challenges had to be faced together. After the visitors continued on their way, the woman returned to her work. The afternoon was becoming noticeably softer now. The sunlight had changed again. Its golden tones were becoming richer. The sky seemed deeper. The fields glowed beneath the approaching evening. The woman carried several baskets toward the pantry. Shelves lined the walls. Each shelf held evidence of countless hours of labor. Jars. Bundles of dried herbs. Stored vegetables. Sacks of grain. The pantry represented security. A well-stocked pantry brought peace of mind. It meant preparation. It meant planning. It meant a measure of protection against uncertain seasons. She arranged everything carefully. Each item found its proper place. The work was quiet, methodical, almost comforting. Order often created a feeling of calm. When things were where they belonged, the household seemed to function more smoothly. Outside, a flock of birds crossed the sky. Their formation shifted and changed as they traveled. For a moment, the woman watched them through the window. Then they disappeared beyond the trees. The afternoon continued. The light grew warmer. The shadows lengthened further. Soon evening would arrive. The household would begin preparing for supper. The animals would be checked again. The day would gradually move toward its familiar conclusion. But for now, there remained this peaceful stretch of late afternoon. A time when the world seemed to slow slightly. A time when the land glowed beneath golden sunlight. A time when ordinary work continued quietly, surrounded by the beauty of a countryside preparing itself for another calm and gentle evening. The late afternoon unfolded slowly across the countryside. The sun had begun its gradual descent toward the horizon, and its light now carried a deeper golden color. Fields that had appeared bright and green during midday seemed warmer now. The edges of trees glowed softly. Fence posts cast long shadows across the grass. The woman stepped outside and paused beside the garden gate. For a few moments, she simply looked around. The day had been productive. Several tasks had been completed. Others would wait for tomorrow. There was comfort in accepting that not every task needed to be finished immediately. The work of a household never truly ended. One responsibility led naturally into another. One day flowed into the next. The garden looked peaceful beneath the afternoon sun. Rows of vegetables stretched neatly across the dark soil. Leaves moved gently in the breeze. A few insects drifted through the air, their wings flashing briefly in the sunlight. The woman walked between the rows once more. Not because urgent work was needed. Mostly because gardeners often enjoyed visiting the places they cared for. The garden felt almost like a companion. Something that changed every day. Something that responded to attention and patience. She examined several plants that would soon be ready for harvest. The signs were clear. The color of the leaves. The size of the vegetables. The feel of the stems. Years of experience had taught her what to look for. Much of this knowledge had been passed down from older women. Mothers. Grandmothers. Aunts. Neighbors. Lessons shared through observation rather than books. The afternoon breeze strengthened slightly. It carried the scent of fields and distant trees. Far away, clouds were beginning to gather along the horizon. Not storm clouds. Just soft clusters drifting lazily across the sky. The woman looked toward them briefly before continuing her walk. Weather remained an important part of daily life. People paid close attention to it. A change in wind. The shape of clouds. The behavior of birds. All these things offered clues about the days ahead. By the time she returned to the house, the shadows had grown longer. The sunlight entering through the windows stretched across the floor in bright golden bands. Inside, the house felt peaceful. Quiet. The calm of late afternoon had settled into every corner. The woman picked up a basket of yarn and sat near the doorway where the light was strongest. The hours before sunset often provided excellent light for handwork. Candles were valuable. Natural daylight was preferred whenever possible. She began winding yarn carefully into neat bundles. The task required little effort. Her hands moved automatically. Years of practice had made the work familiar. Outside, children continued their games. Their laughter occasionally floated through the open door. The sound seemed softer now than it had earlier. The long day was slowly wearing down their energy. Soon they would be called inside. Soon evening routines would begin. The woman smiled faintly as she listened. Childhood seemed to move differently than adulthood. Days felt longer. Seasons felt endless. The future stretched infinitely ahead. Adults understood how quickly time could pass. How 1 year could become another almost without notice. The yarn gradually formed neat bundles beside her chair. Another small task completed. Another piece of household work quietly finished. Many aspects of life in early America depended upon such steady attention. There were rarely dramatic achievements. Rarely moments of celebration for everyday chores. Yet these tasks sustained families year after year. The woman stood and carried the finished bundles to a shelf. There they joined other supplies prepared for future use. The household was always preparing. Preparing for winter. Preparing for harvest. Preparing for unexpected needs. Preparation brought stability. It helped families face uncertain times with greater confidence. Outside, the light continued changing. The golden colors deepened. The sky seemed larger somehow. More open. More peaceful. Birds began returning to trees where they would spend the night. Their calls echoed briefly across the fields before fading into silence. The woman stepped outside once more. The air felt wonderful. Warm but comfortable. The kind of evening that invited people to linger outdoors. She walked slowly toward a small rise overlooking part of the surrounding countryside. From there, she could see fields stretching toward distant woods. The road wound through the landscape like a pale ribbon. A wagon moved slowly in the distance. Its wheels raising a faint trail of dust behind it. The woman watched quietly. Travel was a different experience in those days. Journeys required time. Distances were measured not only in miles but in hours and days. People often remained close to home for much of their lives. The world beyond neighboring towns could seem very far away. Yet within their own communities, life remained rich with familiar faces and familiar places. A hawk glided overhead. Its shadow passed briefly across the ground. Then it continued toward the horizon. The woman followed it with her eyes until it disappeared. Nature provided many small moments of beauty. One did not need special occasions to find them. A bird in flight. A field moving in the wind. Sunlight filtering through leaves. These simple sights became part of daily life. As she stood there, the first hints of evening coolness touched the air. The day was slowly releasing its warmth. The transition felt gentle. Almost comforting. Soon it would be time to prepare the evening meal. The family would gather once again. The familiar routines of supper and evening chores would begin. But for a little while longer, the woman remained where she was. Looking across the countryside. Listening to the wind. Watching the sunlight spread across the land. The world seemed peaceful. Steady. Unhurried. And beneath the vast sky of early America, surrounded by fields, trees, and quiet beauty, the simple life continued exactly as it had for countless ordinary days before. The golden light of late afternoon slowly deepened into the rich colors of evening. Across the countryside, shadows stretched farther and farther across the fields. The tops of trees still glowed brightly in the sunlight, but the ground beneath them had already begun to cool. The sky above remained clear, painted with soft shades of blue that would soon give way to the colors of sunset. The woman turned and walked back toward the house. The familiar path beneath her feet had been traveled so many times that she could have followed it without looking. Small stones rested along the edges. Grass brushed gently against her skirt as she passed. The air smelled faintly of earth, hay, and distant wood smoke. As she approached the yard, she noticed the chickens beginning to gather. Animals often sensed the approach of evening before people did. The chickens moved toward their coop. Birds settled into trees. Even insects seemed to change their songs as daylight slowly faded. The woman smiled softly. Nature followed its own dependable schedule. The sun rose. The sun set. The seasons turned. The years passed. Much of life was built upon these simple certainties. Inside the house, preparations for supper began. The kitchen area soon filled with familiar activity. Vegetables gathered earlier in the day were placed upon the table. A loaf of bread waited nearby. The fire in the hearth was strengthened once again. Fresh wood crackled as flames climbed higher. Warmth spread through the room. The scent of smoke mixed with the aroma of food being prepared. These smells often became some of the strongest memories people carried throughout their lives. The smell of fresh bread. The smell of soup simmering slowly. The smell of a wood fire on a cool evening. Such scents created a feeling of home. The woman moved carefully between tasks. A pot was stirred. Vegetables were sliced. Water was heated. Everything followed a familiar pattern. She did not need to think about every step. Years of experience guided her hands. Outside, the sunlight continued to soften. The sky near the horizon began showing hints of gold and pale orange. The evening was arriving. Children slowly returned from their games. Their faces carried traces of the day's adventures. Dust on their shoes. Grass stains on their clothes. Small treasures hidden in pockets. Perhaps a smooth stone. A feather. A flower. Simple discoveries gathered during long afternoons outdoors. The woman listened as they spoke about their day. Their stories moved quickly from one subject to another. Children often noticed details adults overlooked. A rabbit seen near the woods. A bird's nest hidden in a tree. An oddly shaped cloud drifting overhead. Their excitement brought energy into the room. Soon the family gathered for supper. The table was simple. The meal was simple. Yet there was a quiet richness in sharing food together after a day of work. Conversation flowed gently. Topics were practical. The weather. The garden. The animals. Plans for tomorrow. Small events from the day. No one hurried. There was time. Evening allowed people to slow down. The demands of the day gradually loosened their grip. Outside, the colors of sunset deepened. Orange blended into pink. Pink faded into lavender. The horizon glowed warmly while the first stars began appearing overhead. The woman occasionally glanced toward the window. Sunsets were never exactly the same. Each evening offered something slightly different. Some were bright and dramatic. Others were quiet and subtle. Tonight's sunset seemed gentle. A peaceful ending to a peaceful day. When the meal was finished, the dishes were cleared. The familiar task of washing began. Water splashed softly. Plates and bowls were cleaned carefully. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was treated carelessly. Household items often lasted many years because people maintained them properly. The woman dried each dish and returned it to its place. The shelves looked orderly. Everything stood ready for tomorrow. Outside, darkness continued spreading across the land. The final traces of sunlight disappeared behind distant hills and forests. The stars grew brighter. The moon, still low in the sky, cast a faint silver glow over the fields. The countryside entered its nighttime form. Different sounds now filled the air. Crickets sang steadily. An owl called from somewhere beyond the trees. The breeze moved through leaves with a soft whispering sound. The world felt calm. The woman finished the last of the dishes and sat near the fire. The evening's quieter hours had begun. This was often her favorite part of the day. The busiest work was finished. The household had settled. There was finally time for smaller activities. Perhaps sewing. Perhaps knitting. Perhaps simply sitting and listening to the fire. Tonight she picked up a piece of mending. A shirt needed repair near one sleeve. The fabric had become worn from use. Patiently, she threaded a needle and began stitching. The firelight illuminated her work. The movement of her hands was steady and practiced. Around her, the family relaxed. A child leaned sleepily against a chair. Someone quietly told a story. The room glowed with warmth and comfort. Outside, the stars multiplied across the sky. Far from cities and bright lights, the night seemed immense. The heavens stretched endlessly overhead. Generations of women had looked at these same stars. They had watched the same moon rise above the same fields. They had lived through ordinary days much like this one. Days filled with work. Days filled with responsibility. Days filled with small moments of beauty. The woman paused in her sewing and listened. The crackling fire. The soft voices. The distant sounds of the night. Together they created a feeling of peace. Not the peace of doing nothing, but the peace that comes after meaningful work. The peace of a day well spent. The peace of a home cared for with patience and love. As the evening deepened and the stars shone brighter above the quiet countryside, the simple rhythms of life continued, steady and enduring, like the gentle turning of the seasons themselves. The evening grew deeper, and the small house seemed to become a world of its own. Outside, darkness covered the countryside. The fields disappeared into shadow. The road that wound through the landscape could no longer be seen clearly. Trees stood quietly beneath the stars, their branches moving gently whenever the breeze passed through. Inside, the fire continued to glow. Its light danced across the walls and ceiling. The flames rose and fell softly. Occasionally a piece of wood shifted, sending a shower of tiny sparks upward before they quickly faded. The woman continued her sewing. The needle moved through the fabric with steady precision. She had performed this task thousands of times. Perhaps tens of thousands. Years of practice had made every motion familiar. There was comfort in such familiarity. Not every activity needed to be new or exciting. Sometimes peace came from doing something well and doing it slowly. The room was filled with small sounds. The crackling fire. The soft scrape of thread passing through cloth. The quiet breathing of family members. The distant chorus of crickets outside. Together, these sounds formed the gentle music of evening. Many early American homes sounded much the same after sunset. Across countless farms and settlements, Women sat near hearths completing the final tasks of the day. Some were sewing. Some were spinning thread. Some were preparing supplies for tomorrow. Others simply rested for a few precious moments before sleep. Though separated by distance, they shared many of the same rhythms. The woman finished the repair and held the garment up briefly. The stitching looked strong. The sleeve would serve well for many more months. She folded it carefully and placed it beside several other completed items. Another task finished. Another small contribution to the household. These accomplishments rarely attracted attention. No one celebrated a repaired shirt. No one announced the successful mending of a sleeve. Yet such work quietly supported daily life. The strength of a household often depended upon countless small efforts like these. A child nearby struggled to remain awake. Heavy eyelids blinked slowly. The warmth of the room and the long day had begun to win their battle against youthful determination. The woman smiled softly. Soon the child would be asleep. Tomorrow would bring another day of adventures. Another day of chores. Another day beneath the white American sky. The cycle continued endlessly. Outside, the moon had climbed higher. Its silver light spilled across rooftops and fields. The countryside looked completely different beneath moonlight. Gentler. Softer. Almost dreamlike. The woman stood and walked to the window. For a moment, she looked out into the night. The stars seemed endless tonight. Thousands upon thousands filled the sky. Some appeared bright and sharp. Others glowed faintly in the distance. The Milky Way stretched across the darkness like a pale ribbon. It was a sight that many people of the future would rarely experience. Without electric lights to dim the heavens, the night sky revealed its full beauty. The woman often found comfort in looking upward. The stars felt constant. Reliable. They had watched over generations before her. They would continue shining long after her own lifetime had passed. There was something peaceful in that thought. Something reassuring. She returned to her chair and added another piece of wood to the fire. The flames brightened briefly. Warm light spread through the room once more. The evening was growing late now. Conversations had become quieter. The energy of the day had slowly faded. People moved more slowly. Spoke more softly. The household was preparing itself for rest. The woman picked up a basket containing wool that needed sorting. The task required little concentration. Her hands worked almost automatically. Separating fibers. Organizing materials. Preparing them for future use. The work felt soothing. Many household chores possessed this quality. The repetition encouraged calm thought. The steady rhythm of the task created a sense of order. Hours spent working with one's hands often brought a quiet kind of peace. Outside, an owl called from somewhere near the woods. Its voice echoed briefly across the darkness. Then silence returned. The crickets continued their endless song. The breeze moved through the trees. The night carried on. The woman thought about tomorrow's work. There would be bread to bake. The garden would need attention. The animals would require care. Perhaps there would be laundry if the weather remained fair. The tasks did not feel burdensome. They simply belonged to life. Just as sunrise belonged to morning. Just as sunset belonged to evening. Responsibilities arrived naturally and were met one by one. This rhythm had shaped the lives of countless women. It demanded effort. It demanded patience. But it also created a sense of purpose. Every task mattered. Every contribution helped sustain the family. As the evening moved closer to night, the woman finished sorting the wool and placed the basket aside. The room had grown very quiet now. One by one, family members prepared for bed. Candles were extinguished. Their small flames disappeared into darkness. Only the hearth remained. Its glow painted the room with warm shades of orange and gold. The woman looked around the house. The familiar table. The shelves. The chairs. The spinning wheel resting silently in the corner. These objects had become part of daily life. Simple things. Useful things. Things touched by countless ordinary moments. The house itself seemed to hold memories. Not through grand events, but through everyday living. Meals shared together. Stories told beside the fire. Children growing year by year. Seasons passing beyond the windows. The woman stood and performed the final tasks of the day. A chair was moved into place. A few items were arranged for the morning. The door was checked. The fire was adjusted carefully. Preparation for tomorrow began before today had fully ended. Such habits saved time. They made life smoother. They reflected years of experience. Finally, there was nothing more to do. The day had reached its conclusion. Outside, the stars continued shining above the sleeping countryside. The moon traveled silently across the sky. The fields rested beneath silver light. The garden waited quietly for dawn. The animals slept. The roads were empty. The world felt peaceful. And within the warmth of the small house, another ordinary day in the life of an early American woman slowly came to its gentle and well-earned end. The house rested in silence. The fire in the hearth had settled into a bed of glowing coals. Its warmth still lingered in the room, though the flames themselves had grown smaller. Outside, the countryside slept beneath a blanket of darkness and starlight. Hours passed quietly. The moon continued its slow journey across the sky. The wind moved through distant trees. Crickets sang from the fields. An owl called once and then fell silent. The world seemed content to rest. Inside the house, the woman slept peacefully. The day's work had been long but familiar. Her hands, which had spent the day carrying water, preparing food, tending plants, and mending clothing, were finally still. Tomorrow would bring another full day. But tonight belonged to rest. For many early American women, sleep was precious. The hours between evening and dawn offered a brief pause from endless responsibilities. It was a time when gardens could wait. Laundry could wait. Meals could wait. The work of the household would begin again soon enough. But for now, everything was quiet. Gradually, the darkness began to change. Far to the east, the sky softened ever so slightly. The stars closest to the horizon faded. The long night was slowly giving way to morning. Another day was approaching. The countryside awakened little by little. A bird stirred in a nearby tree. Then another. The first songs of dawn drifted through the cool air. Soft notes. Gentle notes. The kind of sounds that had greeted generations of people before sunrise. Inside the house, the woman opened her eyes. The room remained dim. Only the faintest hint of morning light entered through the windows. For a few moments she remained still, listening. This was often one of the calmest moments of the day. Before chores. Before conversation. Before movement. There was only quiet. Then she rose. The floor felt cool beneath her feet. A shawl was placed around her shoulders. And once again she crossed the room toward the hearth. The ritual was familiar. Almost sacred in its consistency. She knelt beside the ashes and searched carefully. Hidden beneath the gray surface, tiny embers still glowed. The fire had survived the night. Patiently, she added kindling. Small pieces first. Then larger ones. Soon flames appeared. Orange light flickered across the room. Warmth slowly returned. Another day had officially begun. Outside, dawn spread across the countryside. The sky turned pale blue. Clouds caught the first rays of sunlight. The fields shimmered with dew. Every blade of grass seemed to sparkle. The woman stepped outside carrying a bucket. The morning air felt cool and refreshing. A light mist rested over low areas of the land. Trees emerged slowly from the haze. The world looked peaceful. Almost dreamlike. She paused briefly before beginning her walk. Many mornings offered moments like this. Moments when the beauty of the land revealed itself quietly. No grand spectacle. Just soft light. Fresh air. And the gentle stillness that exists before the day fully awakens. The path to the well was familiar. Her feet knew every curve and every stone. Years of walking the same route had made it second nature. Along the way, birds fluttered among bushes and trees. A rabbit darted through the grass before disappearing beneath a hedge. Nature was beginning its own daily routines. At the well, she lowered the bucket carefully. The rope slid through her hands. A splash echoed from below. Then came the steady pull as she lifted the water back toward the surface. The bucket emerged shining in the early sunlight. Tiny droplets sparkled like jewels before falling back into the darkness of the well. Water was heavy. Yet carrying it had become part of life. It was one of countless tasks repeated so often that it felt almost effortless, despite the physical work involved. The woman carried the bucket home. The water swayed gently with each step. The morning sun rose higher. Its warmth began touching the fields. Mist slowly disappeared. The day brightened. Back inside the house, breakfast preparations began. The fire crackled cheerfully. A kettle hung above the flames. Simple ingredients were gathered. Nothing extravagant. Nothing wasteful. The meals of ordinary families reflected practicality and care. Every ingredient had value. Every meal represented effort. As food cooked, the woman moved through the house performing small morning tasks. A blanket was folded. A chair was straightened. Supplies were checked. The routines flowed naturally from one to another. Years of practice had created an efficient rhythm. Soon the household would fully awaken. Children would rise. Voices would fill the rooms. The quiet solitude of dawn would gradually fade. But for now, there remained a few precious moments of calm. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The golden beams stretched across the wooden floor. Dust floated lazily through the light. The house seemed peaceful. Content. The woman stood by the window and looked outside. The garden awaited. The animals awaited. The many responsibilities of the day were ready to begin. Yet there was no feeling of hurry. The work would be done. One task at a time. 1 hour at a time. As it always had been. As it always would be. Beyond the house, the countryside stretched beneath the growing light of morning. Fields rolled gently toward the horizon. Trees swayed softly in the breeze. Birds filled the air with song. Another ordinary day was unfolding. Another day shaped by patience, effort, and simple routines. And like countless women across early America, she stepped forward to meet it with quiet determination, carrying with her the steady strength that turned ordinary days into the foundation of an entire way of life. As the morning continued, the countryside slowly filled with movement. The early stillness faded little by little. Smoke rose from chimneys throughout the settlement. Doors opened. Voices drifted through the cool air. Across fields and farmyards, people stepped into another day of familiar work. The woman carried breakfast to the table. The meal was simple, as most meals were. Fresh bread. Warm porridge. Milk gathered from the previous day. Perhaps a little butter prepared through patient labor. Nothing on the table had appeared easily. Every item represented time and effort. The grain had been planted, harvested, and ground. The milk had come from animals requiring daily care. The bread had been mixed, kneaded, and baked beside the fire. Meals connected many different tasks together. The family gathered quietly. The morning light filled the room. Sunbeams rested across the table and floor. Outside, birds continued singing from nearby trees. The day felt fresh and full of possibility. When breakfast ended, the woman cleared the dishes and began washing them. The task was familiar. Water splashed softly into a basin. Wooden bowls were cleaned and dried. Everything was returned to its proper place. Order was important. A well-organized home saved time and reduced confusion. People depended upon knowing where things belonged. After the dishes were finished, the woman stepped outside. The garden awaited her attention once more. The morning sun was climbing steadily now. Its warmth spread across the land. Dew still lingered in shaded areas, but most of the moisture had already begun to disappear. The rows of vegetables looked healthy. Leaves stretched toward the sunlight. Flowers bloomed among herbs planted near the edge of the garden. Bees moved busily between blossoms. The woman knelt beside a row of beans. A few weeds had appeared overnight. Nature never truly rested. Plants grew constantly. Some were welcome. Others required removal. Patiently, she worked her way through the rows. The soil felt rich beneath her hands. The scent of earth rose into the air. It was a smell closely connected to life itself. The smell of growth. The smell of harvests yet to come. Many women spent countless hours in gardens like this. The work could be tiring. Yet it also offered moments of peace. The garden existed at its own pace. Nothing could be rushed. Seeds became plants in their own time. Flowers appeared when they were ready. Vegetables ripened according to the season. The woman understood this well. Years of experience had taught her patience. As she worked, a gentle breeze moved through the garden. Leaves rustled softly. A butterfly drifted past, pausing briefly on a nearby flower before continuing on its journey. Small moments like these often passed unnoticed. Yet they were part of daily life. Part of the quiet beauty that surrounded ordinary days. By mid-morning, the sun stood higher. The air felt warmer. The woman gathered several vegetables ready for harvest. She placed them carefully into a basket. A few onions. Several beans. Fresh herbs. The basket gradually filled. Every harvest, no matter how small, contributed to the household. Nothing was insignificant. Back at the house, she placed the vegetables on the table and began preparing some for storage. Others would be used for meals later in the day. Again, the familiar pattern appeared. Gather. Prepare. Store. Use. The cycle repeated throughout the year. Food preservation was one of the most important skills in early America. Summer abundance could not be wasted. Families depended upon supplies lasting through winter. The woman selected several herbs and tied them into small bundles. Soon they would hang to dry. The scent filled the room immediately. Fresh and pleasant. The smell lingered in the air as she worked. Nearby, sunlight illuminated shelves holding jars and containers. Each one represented preparation. Each one reflected hours of effort. The pantry was more than a storage space. It was a record of work completed across many seasons. Outside, the sounds of the settlement drifted through the open window. A wagon passed along the road. Children laughed somewhere nearby. A dog barked briefly before becoming quiet again. Life continued all around her. Ordinary life. Steady life. The kind of life that rarely appeared in history books yet formed the experience of most people. The woman moved to another task. A basket of clothing needed attention. Several garments required mending. One apron had a loose seam. A shirt needed a patch near the elbow. Patiently, she threaded a needle. The work began once more. Needle through fabric. Thread pulled tight. Small movements repeated again and again. Many hours of life were spent this way. Working with one's hands. Creating. Repairing. Maintaining. The tasks were practical. Yet there was also something soothing about them. The steady rhythm encouraged calm thought. Outside, clouds drifted slowly across the sky. Their shadows moved over distant fields. The day remained beautiful. Warm but comfortable. The kind of weather people appreciated after long winters or heavy storms. The woman glanced through the window occasionally as she sewed. The landscape always offered something worth noticing. A bird landing on a fence. Wind moving through tall grass. Sunlight reflecting from leaves. Nature provided endless small scenes. None dramatic. All beautiful. The morning gradually moved toward noon. The sunlight became brighter. The shadows shorter. The sounds of activity throughout the settlement continued steadily. Another ordinary day was unfolding exactly as countless others had before it. Through quiet work. Through simple routines. Through the patient efforts of women whose days were shaped not by great events, but by the steady responsibilities that sustained homes, families, and communities year after year. And as the morning hours slipped gently toward afternoon, the woman continued her work, surrounded by sunlight, birdsong, and the peaceful rhythms of early American life. By the time the morning approached noon, the countryside had settled into the warm and steady rhythm of the day. The sun stood high above the fields. Its light spread across gardens, barns, fences, and dirt roads. Shadows had grown shorter now. The cool freshness of dawn felt far away. In its place came the comfortable warmth of late morning. Inside the house, the woman continued her sewing. The garment resting in her lap was slowly returning to good condition. Each careful stitch strengthened the fabric. Each repair added more life to something that might otherwise have worn out. Nothing useful was discarded without reason. Cloth represented work. Thread represented work. Every item in the household carried value. The woman finished the final stitches and examined her work. The seam looked strong. The garment would serve well for many months to come. She folded it neatly and placed it beside several other repaired items. Another task completed. Another small contribution to the daily life of the household. Outside, a gentle breeze moved through the yard. The leaves of nearby trees shimmered in the sunlight. Birds occasionally crossed the sky overhead. The day felt calm. There were no signs of rain. No signs of strong winds. Just a quiet summer afternoon slowly approaching. The woman stepped outside carrying a basket. Today she planned to gather a few more supplies from the garden and nearby areas around the property. Such tasks happened often. A household constantly required ingredients, materials, and resources. A little gathered here. A little gathered there. Small efforts accumulated over time. The basket swung gently from her arm as she walked. The path led first through the garden. The plants looked healthy beneath the bright sunlight. Tomato vines climbed their supports. Bean plants stretched upward. Herbs released their fragrance whenever the breeze touched them. The woman selected several vegetables and added them to her basket. Nearby, bees moved among blossoms with quiet determination. They seemed endlessly busy. Yet their work never appeared rushed. There was something peaceful about watching them. They simply moved from one flower to another, following the rhythm nature had given them. The woman continued toward a patch of wild plants growing beyond the garden. Years of experience had taught her which plants were useful. Some could flavor food. Some served practical household purposes. Others were valued for traditional remedies. Knowledge like this often passed from one generation to the next. Mothers taught daughters. Grandmothers shared what they knew. Lessons were repeated season after season. The woman gathered several useful plants and placed them carefully into her basket. The scent rose immediately. Fresh. Earthy. Pleasant. The smell blended with the warm air and the fragrance of summer fields. For a moment she paused beneath the shade of a large tree. The leaves overhead created moving patterns of light and shadow on the ground. The breeze felt cool here. Comfortable. She listened quietly. Birds sang from distant branches. Insects hummed softly. The countryside seemed alive with gentle sounds. Many people today might have considered such silence unusual. But in early America, these sounds were the soundtrack of daily life. Nature remained close. Always present. Always part of the experience of living. After resting briefly, the woman returned toward the house. The basket felt pleasantly heavy now. The harvest was not large, but it was useful. And usefulness mattered. Inside, she spread the gathered plants across the table. Some would be dried. Some would be used immediately. Each one had a purpose. The afternoon meal would soon need preparation. The woman began organizing ingredients. The familiar routines continued. Food preparation occupied a significant part of every day. Meals did not appear instantly. They required planning and effort. Ingredients needed gathering. Fires needed tending. Water needed carrying. Every meal represented many different tasks working together. The fire in the hearth was strengthened once again. Flames rose gently. The room filled with warmth. Soon the scent of cooking began spreading through the house. Vegetables simmered slowly. Bread rested nearby. Simple foods. Wholesome foods. The kind that sustained families through long days of work. As the meal cooked, the woman looked through the window. The countryside stretched peacefully beneath the bright sky. A wagon moved along the distant road. Its progress was slow and steady. Travel often required patience. Journeys that might seem short today could take hours or even days. People learned not to hurry. The road would take as long as it took. The woman watched the wagon for a moment before returning to her work. The smell of cooking filled the room now. The familiar aromas created a sense of comfort. Home. Family. Routine. These simple things carried great meaning. The afternoon continued. The sunlight shifted slightly across the floor. Time moved forward almost unnoticed. Outside, children played in the shade. Their laughter drifted through the open windows. Inside, the woman prepared the table. Everything was simple. Everything was practical. Yet there was a quiet beauty in such simplicity. The polished surface of a wooden table. The warm glow of sunlight. The scent of fresh food. The sound of a breeze moving through nearby trees. Life did not require grandeur to feel meaningful. Many of its richest moments appeared in ordinary settings. As noon approached, the household prepared to pause briefly from its various tasks. The day still held many hours. There would be more work. More responsibilities. More small accomplishments. But for now, there was the comfort of a meal prepared with care and the peaceful feeling of another beautiful day unfolding beneath the wide skies of early America. The woman glanced once more through the window. The fields shimmered in the sunlight. The trees swayed gently. The clouds drifted lazily overhead. And all around her, life continued in its familiar, steady rhythm, shaped by patience, purpose, and the quiet strength that filled so many ordinary days. The afternoon light rested softly over the countryside as the household settled into a quiet pause. The meal had been prepared, simple and warm, filling the small home with a familiar sense of comfort. Nothing in the moment felt hurried. Nothing demanded more than what could be done with steady hands and patient time. Outside, the fields moved gently under the breeze. The trees swayed in slow rhythm, as if the land itself was breathing in calm repetition. The sky remained open and wide, carrying clouds that drifted without urgency. Inside, there was only stillness now. The woman stood for a moment near the window, watching the daylight spread across the land she knew so well. Every part of it felt familiar. The garden she had tended. The path she had walked countless times. The rooms that held the quiet memory of daily work and simple living. There was no need for anything beyond this moment. The day would continue in its ordinary way. There would always be more tasks, more seasons, more years unfolding one after another. But for now, everything felt balanced in a way that asked for nothing more. The sound of gentle movement filled the house, chairs shifting slightly, a soft step across the wooden floor, the faint crackle of warmth still holding in the hearth. Outside, sunlight slowly continued its journey across the sky. Nothing rushed it. Nothing stopped it. It simply moved forward, as it always had. And in that quiet motion of time, in the steady presence of a life shaped by small routines and patient days, everything felt whole in its simplicity. The woman returned to the table, where the familiar rhythm of home continued without effort or noise. The world beyond the walls remained wide and calm, stretching endlessly into fields, trees, and sky. And there, in the gentle silence of an ordinary afternoon, the day continued to unfold softly, quietly, and without end.